The crimson light of Kepler for 4 to B's twin suns cast long shadows across the crystalline spires of the Velinari capital as High Archivist Kethamora dismissed humanity's final cultural exchange. With a contemptuous flick of his four-jointed fingers, "Primitive," he declared, his voice resonating through the council chamber's bioacoustic walls. Their stories lack sophistication, heroes who triumph through violence. Tales of impossible odds overcome by stubborn refusal to surrender, narratives celebrating destruction over creation. His luminescent eyes swept the assembled dignitaries. "They call these myths and legends, we call them evidence of a species unfit for galactic society." Captain Darius Wolf sat motionless in the defendant's chair, his weathered hands clasped behind his back despite the energy restraints. The scar running from his left temple to his jaw, a souvenir from the Titan War, caught the alien sunlight. Around him, 4 to 7 other humans waited in similar restraints, the last surviving crew of the exploration vessel Indomitable. The trial had been a foregone conclusion 3 months ago. First contact had seemed like humanity's greatest triumph. The Velinari Confederation, a coalition of 47 worlds, spanning 12 star systems, had welcomed Earth's ambassadors with ceremonies that lasted weeks. They'd exchanged technologies, shared cultural achievements, and open discussions about humanity joining their peaceful collective. Then came the cultural evaluation. Consider this tale. Kethamora continued, projecting a holographic display that showed scenes from humanity's submitted archives. They call it the Iliad, a story celebrating a decade-long war over a single woman, ending in the brutal sack of a city. Or this, The Lord of the Rings, where the solution to evil is to destroy rather than understand. The projection shifted to show footage of human children watching these stories with wide, fascinated eyes. They poison their young with fantasies of heroic violence. They glorify sacrifice, celebrate suicidal bravery, and worship the concept of fighting against impossible odds. Kethamora's voice dripped with disgust. Whereas we achieved interstellar peace through negotiation, compromise, and the wisdom to surrender when defeat is inevitable. Wolf's jaw tightened, but he remained silent. The Velinari had made their position clear. Humanity was too dangerous for civilized space. Their stories proved it. Children raised on tales of David slaying Goliath, of 300 Spartans holding off an empire, of rebels destroying Death Stars. Such a species could never be trusted with the secrets of galactic civilization. The sentence is exile, Kethamora announced. Your species will be returned to your homeworld. Quarantined indefinitely, your ship will be disabled. Your crew imprisoned until a suitable transport can be arranged. But Wolf wasn't listening anymore. Through the chamber's transparent walls, he could see the Velinari fleet assembling over 300 vessels, each the size of a city block, their hulls gleaming with the soft curves and organic lines that mark peaceful species. No weapons, no armor, no understanding of what they were really dealing with. The Velinari had made one crucial mistake in their cultural analysis. They dismissed humanity's stories as primitive fantasy, missing the deeper truth. These weren't just tales of impossible victories. They were instruction manuals. As the guards moved to escort the humans to their temporary prison, Wolf caught the eye of his weapons specialist, Lieutenant Vera Kowalski. She was staring at the same fleet display, her expression unreadable. Next to her, Chief Engineer Marcus Reed was studying the chamber's bioacoustic walls with professional interest, while Communications Officer Elena Vasquez had her head tilted as if listening to something unleash. He could hear 40-8 humans against 300 ships and a civilization that spanned the galaxy. The Velinari were wrong about one thing: these weren't impossible odds. They were just Tuesday. The holding cells aboard the Velinari command ship Gentle Harmony were designed for peaceful species. Smooth walls of living coral that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns, floors soft as moss, and barriers of coherent energy that hummed with frequencies meant to induce calm. The Velinari had spent 3,000 years perfecting pacification techniques. They'd never met humans before. Frequency analysis complete, Elena whispered, her fingers tracing invisible patterns in the air as she analyzed the energy barrier's harmonic structure. Her background in xenolinguistics extended to understanding alien technology languages. The containment field oscillates at 847.3 terahertz, with harmonic resonances at 73 distinct frequencies. Reed finished, his engineering mind already 3 steps ahead. If we could generate a counter-oscillation at the inverse Wavelength, we need a power source, Vera interjected quietly. And a way to amplify the signal. Wolf smiled grimly. The Velinari had confiscated their weapons, but missed the most dangerous thing humans carried. Their minds. While other species saw technology as external tools, humans integrated it into their thinking, their planning, their very identity. Anyone remember the story of the Trojan horse? Wolf asked conversationally, across the holding area. Dr. Yuki Tanaka looked up from where she'd been examining the coral walls, with apparent scientific curiosity, particularly the part about appearing harmless while carrying hidden weapons. Inside, my grandmother always preferred the tale of Burr Rabbit and the Tar Baby, said Corporal Jackson Okafor, his deep voice carrying a hint of Lagos accent. Sometimes the best way to win is to let your enemy think they've already won. The Velinari guards, tall, graceful beings with gossamer wings and faces like living jewelry, watched the humans with mild interest. Their translation implants processed the words, but missed the subtext. To them, the humans were simple sharing, meaningless cultural anecdotes to pass time. They had no idea they were listening to a war council. Reed had been right about the power source. The Velinari biotechnology was remarkable, but it relied on organic energy flows that could be redirected. While the guards observed the humans telling their primitive stories, Dr. Tanaka was actually mapping the ship's circulatory systems through the coral walls. The living vessel was essentially one massive organism, and like any organism, it had pressure points. Elena's listening to the ship's harmonic frequencies had revealed something more interesting. The Velinari communications network was entirely open. They'd never needed encryption or security protocols because their civilization had no concept of information warfare. Every ship in the fleet was connected by quantum-entangled bionodes, sharing data in real-time, including the ship's defensive systems. The fox knows many things, Wolf said quietly, but the hedgehog knows one big thing. Lieutenant Kowalski's eyes lit up with understanding. She'd been studying the guards' energy weapons, noting their elegant but simplistic design. Weapons built by a species that had never fought a war, never needed to optimize for killing efficiency, never encountered an enemy that would use their own technology against them. Initiating cultural exchange protocol, Elena announced suddenly, her voice carrying clearly through the detention area. The Velinari guards looked puzzled as the human woman began to sing a low, haunting melody that seemed to come from somewhere deep in her chest. Other humans joined in, their voices blending in harmonies that made the coral walls pulse with sympathetic vibrations. Fascinating, one guard murmured to his partner, primitive acoustic expression. Their vocal cords are remarkably developed for a pre-technological species. They didn't recognize the song, couldn't process its significance, but every human in the detention area knew it by heart. From the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli, it was both a signal and a promise. As the Marine Corps' hymn echoed through the living ship, 48 humans prepared to demonstrate why their ancestors had conquered a planet full of predators, why they'd survived ice ages and plagues and wars, why their stories always ended the same way. The Velinari had 300 ships and the confidence of a species that had never lost a war, but they'd never fought Marines before. The harmonic resonance reached critical frequency at 347. Ship time. Elena's voice hit the precise note that caused the containment barriers to fluctuate, and in that microsecond of vulnerability, Reed's improvised counter-oscillation device built from salvaged biocircuits and powered by the ship's own nervous system sent a feedback pulse through the entire network. Every energy barrier in the detention block failed simultaneously. The gentle harmony had never experienced violence. For the first 30 seconds after the containment breach, its bioneural network couldn't process what was happening. The ship's consciousness, a collective entity bred for peaceful exploration, had no reference point for the coordinated brutality now unfolding in its corridors. Vera Kowalski moved like liquid death through the ship's organic passages. The Velinari guards' energy weapons were sophisticated, but impractical, designed for stunning rather than stopping, programmed with safety protocols that prevented lethal discharge. Human weapons had no such limitations. The improvised blade, sheet crafted from a torn bulkhead support, was crude, primitive, and absolutely lethal. Section 7 secured, she reported through the comm system Elena had hacked. 6 guards down, weapons confiscated. The Velinari didn't understand what down meant in military terminology. Their language had no equivalent for killed in action. Because it had never been necessary, they were learning quickly. Reed had reached the ship's neural core, where biocircuitry pulsed with the rhythm of a massive heartbeat. The gentle harmony was more than transportation, it was a living entity, capable of feeling pain, fear, and confusion under normal circumstances. Even humans might have hesitated to torture such a creature. These weren't normal circumstances. I need 5 minutes to reroute the ship's motor functions, Reed called out as his tools improvised from salvaged technology began slicing into neural pathways. The ship's scream of agony echoed through every corridor, a subsonic wail that made the coral walls bleed luminescent fluid. Dr. Tanaka had reached the medical bay, where her xenobiology expertise was being put to creative use. The Velinari had physiology files on every species in their confederation, detailed medical data that made perfect sense for a peaceful civilization focused on healing and understanding. It also made perfect intelligence for targeting vital organs. Their primary neural cluster is located behind the third mandible, she reported, her voice clinical despite the chaos around her. Severe pressure at the base of their wing joints causes systemic paralysis, and their respiratory system has a critical vulnerability. The ship's communications ray crackled with desperate Velinari transmissions. General Harmony to Fleet Command, we are under attack. Under attack by whom? The human prisoners are secured. The humans are killing the crew. They're destroying the ship's nervous system. There, the transmission cut off as Elena's interference protocols flooded the communications network. She'd been busy in the 43 minutes since the breakout, using the Velinari's own quantum entangled network to spread carefully crafted viruses through their fleet. Every ship was now receiving corrupted data, false telemetry, and phantom sensor readings. Wolf stood on the bridge, surrounded by the bodies of Velinari officers who tried to resist. The ship's captain, a delicate creature with wings like stained glass, was still alive, held upright by Corporal Okafor's massive hands around her throat. This is impossible, she gasped through her universal translator. You're a primitive species. You have no weapons, no technology. How are you? We are the weapons. Wolf replied quietly. Every human is a weapon that's been 10,000 years in the making. Every story you dismissed as childish fantasy was a lesson in warfare. Every myth you called primitive was a tactical manual. The bridge's displays showed the Velinari fleet in complete disarray. 3 ships had already suffered catastrophic system failures, as Elena's viruses corrupted their bioneural networks. 2 more were firing on each other, their sensors showing phantom targets that didn't exist. The entire formation was dissolving into chaos as the peaceful species encountered something they'd never experienced: information warfare. Your mistake, Wolf continued, was assuming that because we tell stories about violence, we don't understand it. You thought our myths were fantasy. They're not. They're history. Every impossible victory, every last stand, every David slaying Goliath, it all happened. And it happened because when you back humans into a corner, we don't surrender. The captain's eyes widened as she began to understand. You're going to kill us all. No, Wolf said, his scarred face implacable. We're going to take your ship, use it to return to Earth, and then we're going to come back with more humans, lots more, because you made one final mistake when you sentenced us to exile. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than any shout. You told us we weren't worthy of the galaxy. Now we're going to prove you right. The gentle harmony shuddered as Reed's sabotage reached critical mass. The ship's bioneural network was adapting, learning to route around damaged pathways. But each repair was temporary. The humans weren't just damaging the ship, they were teaching it to feel pain, fear, and desperation. 300 Velinari vessels hung in space, their crews struggling to understand how 48 primitives had turned their most advanced ship into a weapon of terror. They were about to learn why humanity's stories always ended in victory. The Velinari fleet hung in space like scattered pearls, their formation disrupted by hours of phantom attacks and system failures. High Admiral Nethquiran floated in the command center of the flagship Eternal Tranquility, her gossamer wings trembling with confusion and growing fear. Report, she commanded, her voice carrying the harmonics of barely controlled panic. 17 ships have reported complete communications blackout, her aide replied, his usually melodious tones discord with stress. 23 more are experiencing cascading system failures. The gentle harmony has not responded to hails for over an hour. Nethquiran has her eyes focused on the tactical display. In 3 millennia of galactic civilization, the Velinari, had never faced this scenario. Their peaceful confederation had protocols for natural disasters, first contact situations, even a theoretical possibility of encountering hostile species. But those protocols assumed rational actors, beings who could be negotiated with, reasoned with, pacified. They had no protocols for demons. The humans must have assistance, she decided. Some unknown hostile force is using their escape as cover for an attack on our fleet. Perhaps a rogue AI, or a species we haven't encountered. Her tactical officer's response was interrupted by a new transmission, a clear, strong signal coming from the Gentle Harmony. The frequency was wrong, the harmonic structure alien, but the universal translator processed it without difficulty. Velinari fleet. This is Captain Darius Wolf of the Terran vessel Indomitable. I am now in command of your ship Gentle Harmony. We need to talk. The transmission was accompanied by visual data that made several bridge officers retch. Bodies of Velinari crew members, their delicate forms broken and bloodied, were stacked in the Gentle Harmony's corridors like cordwood, the ship's living. Walls pulsed with sickly bioluminescence, neural pathways damaged and leaking. This is High Admiral Nethquiran, she replied, struggling to maintain her composure. Release our crew immediately and surrender yourselves. You will be treated according to galactic convention. Wolf's laughter cut her off, a sound like grinding metal that made the bridge speakers distort. Galactic convention? You mean the same convention that sentenced my species to permanent exile, the same convention that declared us unfit for civilized space. The visual feed shifted to show Wolf on the Gentle Harmony's bridge. Behind him, human crew members were systematically destroying the ship's controls, their faces splattered with alien blood. The scene was primal, terrifying in its casual efficiency. Let me explain something about human convention, Wolf continued. When someone threatens our species, we don't negotiate. We don't surrender. We adapt their technology, learn their weaknesses, and we kill them, all of them. Reed appeared in the transmission, holding a pulsing mass of biocircuitry. I've figured out how their ships work, he announced cheerfully. Quantum entangled neural networks, bioadaptive hull plating, and the most sophisticated sensor arrays I've ever seen. Do you know what we're going to do with this technology? The answer came from Dr. Tanaka, her voice clinical and precise. We're going to use it to hunt down every Velinari colony, every outpost, every ship in the Confederation. We'll study their biology, learn their weaknesses, and then we'll adapt their own technology to kill them more efficiently. Nethquiran felt her secondary heart stuttering with terror. You're talking about genocide? No. Elena's voice joined the conversation, accompanied by the sound of quantum processors being torn apart and rebuilt. Genocide implies we're targeting you because of what you are. We're targeting you because of what you did. This is war. The tactical display erupted with new alerts. 16 more ships were reporting system failures, their bioneural networks collapsing as Elena's viruses continued to spread through the fleet's quantum entangled communications. The Velinari had created a perfect network for sharing information. They'd never considered that someone might use it to share destruction. You have 12 hours, Wolf announced. 12 hours to contact your homeworld, your colonies, your entire confederation. Tell them what happened here. Tell them that humanity is coming. Tell them that when we arrive, we won't be carrying peace treaties or cultural exchanges. The transmission cut to external cameras showing the Gentle Harmony as it began to move, its organic hull rippling with unnatural movements. The ship that had once been a marvel of peaceful engineering was transforming into something else, something brutal, predatory, wrong. What do you want? Nethquiran whispered. The transmission resumed, showing Wolf's scarred face in extreme close-up. We want what you should have given us from the beginning, respect. You called our stories childish. You dismissed our myths as primitive fantasy. Fine. Let us show you what happens when children play with your toys. Behind him, the Gentle Harmony's bridge was being systematically converted into something that looked like a nightmare fusion of human military efficiency and Velinari biotechnology. Weapon systems that had never existed, defense grids that combined organic sensitivity with human paranoia, sensor arrays that could track a target across star systems. Every human knows the story of Pandora's box, Wolf said quietly. You opened it the moment you declared us unfit for your civilization. Now you get to see what we've been keeping locked away. The transmission ended with a final image, 48. Humans working with terrifying coordination to transform the Gentle Harmony from a ship of peace into an instrument of war. They moved like a machine, each person performing their role with practiced efficiency, turning alien technology into weapons that even the Velinari couldn't have imagined. Neth-Quiran stared at the tactical display as more ships reported failures. Her peaceful fleet was dissolving into chaos, and somewhere in the darkness, humanity's children were learning to build nightmares. The 12-hour countdown had begun. The battle began at exactly 080 Standard Galactic Time, when the General Harmony, now rechristened Retribution by its human crew, dropped out of Quantum Jump, directly into the heart of the Velinari formation. High Admiral Neth-Quiran had used the 12-hour warning to prepare as best she could. Her fleet had been reorganized into defensive clusters, bioneural networks hardened against viral intrusion, and every available weapon system activated. 300 ships against one captured vessel. Under normal circumstances, it would have been no contest. But these weren't normal circumstances, and the Retribution was no longer a normal ship. "Contact," Elena announced from her improvised sensor station. Her voice steady despite the chaos around her. 287 active vessels. 15 appear to be non-combat support ships. Reed's modifications to the ship's bioneural network had created something unprecedented, a living vessel that could think like a human. The Retribution didn't just respond to commands, it anticipated them, adapted them, improved them. Where Velinari technology had been designed for harmony and cooperation, the humans had rewired it for war. Primary target cluster at bearing 047, Vera reported, her hands dancing across weapon controls that hadn't existed 24 hours earlier. The ship's original stunning weapons had been torn out and replaced with human innovations, mass drivers that accelerated biometallic projectiles to relativistic speeds, energy weapons that focused coherent plasma into planet-cracking beams. "Fire," Wolf commanded. The Retribution's first salvo turned the Velinari formation into a massacre. Ships designed for peaceful exploration had no armor, no point defense systems, no concept of evasive maneuvers. The mass drivers punched through their organic hulls like paper, while plasma beams severed bioneural networks with surgical precision. 12 ships died in the opening seconds, but the Velinari learned quickly. Admiral Neth-Quiran's desperate commands scattered her fleet into evasive patterns, their elegant vessels flowing through space like schools of luminescent fish. Return fire came from energy weapons designed to stun, not kill but concentrated. Fire from dozens of ships could still be lethal. The Retribution screamed as enemy beams tore through its hull. The ship's bioneural network transmitted pain directly to its human crew, creating a feedback loop of agony and rage that drove them to fight even harder. "Hull breach on decks for through 7, Dr. Tanaka reported, her medical station now serving as damage control. The ship's trying to seal the wounds, but it's learning human pain responses. It's going into shock." Reed's voice crackled over the comm. "That's not a bug, it's a feature. The ship's adrenaline analogs are flooding its systems. Watch the speed increase." The Retribution suddenly accelerated beyond anything the Velinari had thought possible, its biometallic hull rippling with new muscle structures that shouldn't have been able to grow in mere hours. The ship was evolving in real time, adapting to combat conditions with a speed that defied biological science. "Ramming speed," Corporal Okafor reported from the helm, his massive hands gentle on controls that pulsed like living tissue. Targeting the flagship, the Eternal Tranquility tried to evade, but its organic systems were just slow. The Retribution struck the Velinari flagship amidships, its reinforced bow tearing through biometallic hull plating like a spear through flesh. Old vessel screamed the Eternal Tranquility in its death throes. The Retribution in predatory triumph, but the collision cost the humans dearly. The impact killed 16 crew members instantly, their bodies crushed against bulkheads that had been living coral hours before. The Retribution's port weapons array was completely destroyed, and its bioneural network was hemorrhaging data like blood. "Status report," Wolf demanded, pulling himself upright despite the jagged piece of hull plating protruding from his shoulder. 30 to humans still combat effective, Elena reported, her own face streaked with luminescent fluid from ruptured biocircuits. "Ship's neural network operating at 40% capacity. We're hurt, but we're still fighting." The Velinari fleet regrouped around them, forming a sphere of firepower that concentrated on the crippled human vessel. Energy beams lanced through space, each shot precisely calibrated to minimize damage to their own captured ship, while maximizing harm to its human crew. It was a tactical mistake. Dr. Tanaka had been studying Velinari weapon systems since the battle began, and she'd noticed something interesting. Their energy weapons were designed with safety protocols, automatic systems that prevented friendly fire, minimized collateral damage, and protected innocent life. Even in battle, the Velinari couldn't bring themselves to abandon their fundamental nature. Vera, she called out, "Can you modulate our bioluminescent hull patterns to match the Velinari IFF signatures?" Kowalski's predatory smile was visible even through the smoke and chaos. "You want us to pretend to be one of them?" "No," Tanaka replied, her voice carrying the cold precision of a surgeon. "I want us to pretend to be all of them, the retributions." Hull began to pulse with false identification signals, its bioluminescent patterns cycling through every Velinari ship designation in the fleet. The enemy weapons targeting systems, designed to protect their own vessels, began to register conflicting data. Fire control systems hesitated, double-checked, requested confirmation. In that moment of technological confusion, the humans struck. Again. The retributions' remaining weapons now overcharged. Beyond safe parameters opened fire at point-blank range. Mass drivers launched projectiles that had been enhanced with Velinari biotechnology, creating ammunition that could think, adapt, and seek targets with terrifying intelligence. 43 more ships died in the second salvo, their crews never understanding how their own safety systems had been turned against them. But the victory came at a cost. The Retribution was dying, its bioneural network collapsing under the strain of hosting human consciousness. While maintaining ship functions, the organic hull was beginning to reject its human crew like a body rejecting foreign tissue, and there were still over 100 Velinari ships surrounding them. The Retribution hung in space like a dying whale, its biometallic hull split open and bleeding luminescent fluid into the void. Of the 48 humans who had escaped the detention cells, only 19 were still alive. The ship's bioneural network was shutting down one system at a time, and the remaining Velinari fleet was closing in for the kill. Captain Wolf floated in the ruined command center, his left arm useless from a hull breach that had killed his navigation officer. Around him, the surviving crew worked with desperate efficiency to keep their dying ship functional just a little longer. "Reactor core is at 12%, Reed reported, his voice strained. Blood floated in zero gravity around his head. The artificial gravity had failed an hour ago. The ship's trying to hibernate, but I can keep it conscious for maybe another 20 minutes. Elena had jury-rigged a communications array. From salvaged biocircuits and human ingenuity, I'm still receiving their transmissions. They're arguing about whether to board us or just finish us off from a distance." Through the shattered viewport, the Velinari fleet formed a perfect sphere around the crippled Retribution. 212 ships, their organic hulls pulsing with cautious bioluminescence. They had learned to fear the humans, but they had also learned that the humans were mortal. "Captain," Dr. Tanaka's voice was barely a whisper from the medical station. "I need to tell you something about the ship's bioneural network." Wolf pushed himself through the zero gravity to reach her. The doctor's face was pale, her hands trembling as she worked to treat the wounded with salvaged Velinari medical supplies. "When Reed modified the ship's neural pathways," she continued, "he didn't just teach it to think like a human. He taught it to feel like a human. The ship isn't just dying, it's afraid. It's in pain, and it's angry." Wolf stared at her. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that this ship has spent the last 6 hours learning what it means to be human. It's experienced violence, loss, rage, and a desire for revenge. It knows it's dying, and it wants to take as many of them with it as possible." Reed's voice crackled over the calm from the engineering section. "Captain, you need to see this. The ship's doing something I didn't program." The display showed the Retribution's internal structure, but something was wrong. The bioneural network wasn't shutting down, it was changing, adapting, growing. New pathways were forming, connecting systems that had never been connected before. The ship was rebuilding itself on a fundamental level. "It's not trying to heal," Reed said in amazement. "It's trying to evolve into something that can hurt them more efficiently." Elena's sensors detected the change first. Energy readings are spiking across all frequencies. The ship's bioreactor isn't failing, it's overloading. Deliberately. Wolf understood. The Retribution had learned the most human lesson of all. When you can't win, you make sure the enemy pays for their victory. "All hands," he announced over the ship's communication system. "Prepare for final engagement." The ship's going to make one last run, but the Retribution had other plans. The bioneural network suddenly flooded the ship with memories, not human memories, but its own experiences of the last 24 hours. The crew found themselves experiencing the ship's perspective of the battle, feeling its pain as weapons tore through its hull, sharing its rage as its Velinari crew had been slaughtered. And then they felt something else, the ship's knowledge of Velinari technology, biology, and weaknesses. Everything it had learned from its original crew. Everything Dr. Tanaka had discovered during her research. Everything the humans had figured out through trial and error. The Retribution wasn't just sharing information, it was making them part of its final attack. Neural interface is active, Eleanor reported, her voice strange and distant. The ship wants us to direct its systems manually. It can't process the calculations for what it's planning. Vera's hands moved to weapon controls that glowed with new bioluminescent patterns. It's going to use its reactor as a weapon, not an explosion, something else. Something that will turn the energy release into a directed attack. Reed's engineering skills merged with the ship's biological systems, creating targeting solutions that were part mathematics, part intuition, and part pure human venom. If we can modulate the reactor's quantum field, we can create a cascade effect that will propagate through their quantum entangled network. Dr. Tanaka's medical knowledge, combined with the ship's database of Velinari physiology to calculate exactly how much energy would be needed to cause fatal neural disruption. Across multiple ships simultaneously, the Retribution was dying, but it was teaching the humans how to kill with its death. Firing solution calculated, Wolf announced. His consciousness merged with the ship's targeting systems. Around him, 18 other human minds worked in perfect coordination with an alien intelligence that had learned to hate with human efficiency. The Velinari fleet detected the energy buildup too late. Their peaceful nature had no defense against a weapon designed by humans and built by a dying ship that had learned to feel pain for Earth. Wolf whispered. The Retribution screamed its last breath as a weapon that turned its own death into vengeance. The quantum cascade propagated through the Velinari fleet's entangled network at faster-than-light speed, carrying death encoded in the language of their own technology. Ships that had been preparing to finish off the dying Retribution suddenly found their bioneural networks overloading, their organic crews convulsing as alien frequencies tore through their consciousness. 87 ships went dark in the first. Waved out, the Retribution died with the blast, its bioneural network finally succumbing to the massive energy discharge. But its death had been weaponized, turned into something that no peaceful species could have imagined, a ship that used its own destruction to kill its enemies. In the emergency pods that had ejected milliseconds before the cascade, 19 humans watched their improvised weapon tear through the Velinari formation. Captain Wolf floated in Pod 1, his scarred face illuminated by the dying light of alien vessels. Status report, he requested, his voice carrying over the emergency communication network. Pod to operational, Eleanor replied. Reed and Tanaka are unconscious but stable. Pod 3 reporting. Vera's voice was steady despite the fact that her pod had been damaged in the launch. Okafor's hurt bad, but he's alive. Of the 48 humans who had been imprisoned on the Gentle Harmony, only 12 had survived the battle, but they had taken nearly a third of the Velinari fleet with them, and the psychological damage was far worse than the physical casualties. The remaining Velinari ships hung in space, like broken dreams, their crews struggling to understand what had happened. High Admiral Nethquiran's voice crackled over the emergency frequencies, her usually melodious tones discordant with shock and grief. Humans, she called out, please respond, we need to talk. Wolf activated his pod's transmitter. We're listening. This has to stop. Nethquiran pleaded. You've proven your point. You've shown us that we underestimated your species. But this level of destruction, surely we can find a peaceful solution. Wolf's laughter was soft, sad, and infinitely tired. Peaceful solution, Admiral. You had 3,000 years to find a peaceful solution. You chose exile instead. Through his pod's viewport, he could see the wreckage of the battle, twisted metal and organic matter drifting in the void, the scattered remains of both human ingenuity and Velinari pacifism. The Retribution's death had created a debris field that would orbit the system for millennia, a monument to what happened when humanity's children were told they couldn't play with the adults. But we can change, Nethquiran insisted. We can. Reconsider your species' application for no. Wolf's voice cut through her plea like a blade. You can't undo what you've done. You looked at our stories, our myths, our legends, our dreams, and you called them primitive, childish, unworthy of your enlightened civilization. Eleanor's pod drifted closer to his, her voice joining the conversation. You never understood what those stories really were. They weren't fantasies. They were warnings. Dr. Tanaka's weak voice came from Pod 2. Every culture in human history has the same story. David and Goliath, the few against the many, the last stand against impossible odds. You dismissed them as primitive mythology, but they're not myths. Reed added, his engineer's mind still working despite his injuries. They're historical records. Documentation of what happens when someone pushes humanity too far. Wolf watched as the surviving Velinari ships began to withdraw, their formation dissolving as individual captains made the decision to flee, rather than face more human ingenuity in the distance. He could see rescue beacons from the ships that had survived the cascade, thousands of Velinari crew members floating in emergency pods, calling for help that might never come. You want to know the real tragedy? Wolf continued. We would have been good for your civilization. Humans are natural explorers, natural protectors. We could have helped you explore dangerous regions of space, defended your peaceful worlds against genuine threats, shared our technology and our stories and our dreams. His voice hardened. Instead, you decided we were too dangerous to exist in your perfect galaxy. So you made us dangerous, the communication channel filled with static. As more Velinari ships activated their jump drives, fleeing toward their distant homeworlds. But Wolf knew it was too late. The humans had learned too much, adapted too quickly, and most importantly they had tasted victory. Captain, Elena said quietly, I'm detecting quantum signatures from at least 6 different Velinari worlds. They're broadcasting our engagement to their entire civilization. Wolf smiled grimly. Good. Let them all see what happened here. Let them understand what they've unleashed. Through the debris field, a single Velinari ship approached a small scout vessel flying under a flag of truce. Its transmission was direct and unencrypted. Captain Wolf, this is Sub-Commander Velthara. I request permission to retrieve survivors from both sides. Granted, Wolf replied, but understand something, Sub-Commander. This isn't over. This is just the beginning. As the rescue ship began collecting human and Velinari survivors alike, Wolf activated his pod's emergency beacon not to call for help, but to send a message toward Earth, a simple transmission, containing tactical data, weapon schematics, and most importantly, the location of every Velinari world in the Confederation. You called our stories childish, he murmured, watching the rescue operation through his viewport. But every human child knows how these stories end. The hero gets bloodied, beaten, left for dead. The enemy thinks they've won. Elena's pod drifted alongside his, her face visible through the transparent aluminum viewport. She was smiling not with joy, but with the satisfaction of a job well done. And then the hero gets back up. She finished in the wreckage of the Retribution. Pieces of human-modified Velinari technology continued to broadcast their signal toward Earth. The message was simple, encoded in frequencies that only human equipment could detect. Mission accomplished. Come armed. The Velinari had spent 3 millennia building a peaceful civilization, based on cooperation, understanding, and the wisdom of avoiding conflict. In 24 hours, 48 humans had taught them a new lesson. Sometimes the stories you dismiss as primitive fantasy are actually prophecy. As the last Velinari ship jumped to safety, carrying news of humanity's primitive capabilities to every corner of the Confederation, Captain Darius Wolf closed his eyes and smiled. Somewhere in the darkness between stars, Earth was receiving his message. Soon, very soon, the galaxy would learn what happened when you told humanity's children they couldn't have something. They would take it anyway, and they would make sure everyone remembered the lesson. The stars themselves seemed to flicker with anticipation as humanity prepared to introduce the galaxy to some very old stories about impossible victories, last stands, and the price of underestimating the species that had conquered a world full of predators by becoming the apex predator themselves. The Velinari had been right about one thing. Human stories were different from theirs. Human stories always ended in victory.